September 20th, 1918. A small chapel in southern Italy, a friar kneeling alone before a crucifix. The Spanish flu had swept through the convent and killed nearly every friar who lived there. Only 3 remained. What happened next, the friar described in a letter to his spiritual director, a letter the Vatican still holds today. It begins like this. Everything happened in an instant. I saw before me a mysterious figure whose hands, feet, and chest were streaming with blood. I felt as though I were fainting and dying. Had God not intervened to sustain my heart, I think I would have died. When the vision disappeared, he looked down at his own hands. They were bleeding, and they would remain open for the next 50 years. His feet too, his chest too. 5 wounds, in exactly the same places where the nails and the lance had pierced the body of Jesus Christ at Calvary. He was 31 years old. His name was Francesco Forgione. The world would come to know him as Padre Pio. Those wounds never closed again, for 50 years. To understand what happened in that chapel, you have to go back to the beginning, to a small farming village in southern Italy in the 1880s. No electricity, no running water, a place where life moved slowly and faith ran deep. Francesco was born there on May 25, 1887. His parents were poor farmers, hard-working, deeply Catholic, and entirely ordinary by the standards of their world. They had 7 children. Francesco was the 3rd. From the outside, he seemed like any other boy from a poor Italian farming family. But those close to him noticed something early on. He was unusually still, unusually drawn to the church, and unusually reluctant to play with other children. His mother recalled, every morning and afternoon he went to church to visit Jesus and the Virgin Mary. Sometimes I told him, go outside, play with the boys, but he always said, I don't want to because they blaspheme. What his mother did not know was that her son had been seeing visions since the age of 5. Angels, the Virgin Mary, Jesus, and also demons. Terrifying figures that filled him with fear, but were always driven away by the heavenly apparitions that followed. Francesco considered this completely normal. He assumed everyone experienced the same thing. It was only later that he understood how alone he was in what he saw. At 15, he had a vision that would define the rest of his life. A radiant man appeared and called him to fight against a giant whose head touched the sky. The giant was the devil. They fought and won, and at the end, the radiant man said, "This battle will last your entire life, but fight without fear. You will always win." He was 15. He had no idea what that promise would cost him. In 1903, at 16, he entered the Capuchin friars, a religious order rooted in the tradition of St. Francis of Assisi, known for their simple brown robes and their work among ordinary people. He chose the name Pio. His health was fragile from the start. He was sent home to his parents several times to recover from illness, but each time he recovered, he went straight back. In 1910, he took his solemn vows. In 1910, he was ordained a priest. Those who attended his early masses noticed something they had never experienced before. A mass celebrated by Padre Pio lasted an average of 4 hours, not because it was slow, but because of the intensity with which he prayed. Many said it felt less like a ceremony and more like watching someone endure the actual suffering of Christ.
Around this time, Padre Pio made a decision the Church permits only in extraordinary circumstances. He offered himself to God as a living sacrifice on behalf of sinners. In Catholic theology, this is not symbolic. Those who make that offering pay for it. What followed was the price. In 1916, at 30, he arrived at a small Capuchin community in San Giovanni Rotondo, a remote town in southern Italy. He would never leave. His days were strictly ordered. He woke before dawn and spent hours in silent prayer before anything else. He prayed 5 rosaries a day. He often said, "In books we seek God, in prayer we find Him." After Mass, he began receiving the faithful. Word spread quickly. People came from neighboring towns, then from other regions, then from other countries. The line at his confessional grew longer every month. At his peak, Padre Pio spent up to 16 hours a day hearing confessions. What made his confessional different was not the hours, it was what happened inside it. People sat down and found that he already knew things about them they had told no one, sins they had never confessed, secrets carried for decades. He would name them quietly, without judgment, before the person had spoken a word. Many people who arrived as skeptics left as believers. It was in this world of prayer and confession that September 20th, 1918 arrived. The letter Padre Pio sent to his spiritual director after receiving the Stigmata is one of the most remarkable documents in the Vatican's archives. He describes a state between sleep and waking, a figure streaming with blood from 5 wounds, terror and peace mixed in a way his words could barely hold, and then silence and the wounds on his own body. Imagine the torment I am experiencing every single day. The wound in my chest bleeds continuously. It begins on Thursday afternoon and continues until Saturday. I am dying of pain. The superiors brought in doctors. A Professor Amico, a committed skeptic, subjected Padre Pio to an 8-day treatment designed to force the wounds to close. At the end of 8 days, the wounds had not closed. They had opened further and bled more intensely than before. His report concluded that the wounds were medically inexplicable. Over the following decades, multiple independent medical examinations reached the same conclusion. The wounds did not respond to treatment. They did not become infected. They did not deteriorate as open wounds normally would. They simply bled on the same weekly cycle with the same pattern for 50 years. Padre Pio wore brown wool gloves to hide the wounds on his hands, but during Mass, when he raised the chalice, the gloves shifted. Those in the front pews could see the blood, and what they saw left them changed in ways they struggled to describe for the rest of their lives. He was the only Catholic priest in recorded history to bear the Stigmata, and the only one to celebrate Mass with them for 50 years. With the Stigmata came the miracles. Padre Pio did not seek attention for them. He deflected credit, minimized what had happened, and redirected people back to their own faith. But the accounts kept coming. The case of Gemma Di Giorgi is among the most thoroughly documented. In June of 1947, a 7-year-old girl named Gemma arrived in San Giovanni Rotondo with her grandmother. Gemma had been blind from birth. Her eyes had no pupils. Multiple doctors had examined her and reached the same conclusion. There was nothing medicine could do. She would never see.
Her grandmother refused to accept that. When they entered the church where Padre Pio was distributing communion, he looked across the crowded room and called out, "Gemma, come here." He had never met them. He did not know their names. They made their way to the altar and knelt. Padre Pio smiled at the child. He told her she could make her first communion right there. He heard her confession. He placed his hands over her eyes. Then he gave her communion and blessed her. Her grandmother asked afterward whether she had prayed for her sight in that moment. Gemma said she had not. When Padre Pio blessed her a second time, he said quietly, "May Our Lady always bless you, dear child." Gemma cried out. She could see. 4 months later, a prominent ophthalmologist examined her thoroughly and wrote in his formal report, "Against all the laws of physics and biology, this child, without pupils and therefore absolutely incapable of seeing, sees perfectly." In 1995, nearly 50 years after that morning, Gemma Di Giorgi was still alive, still teaching school in Sicily,
still able to see. The miracles were not confined to the church. During the Second World War, an Italian army captain was pinned down in battle when a Capuchin friar appeared at his side and shouted, "Move! Get away from here now!" The captain ran. Seconds later, a shell exploded in the exact spot where he had been standing. The friar was gone. Someone suggested it might have been Padre Pio. The captain traveled to San Giovanni Rotondo. The moment he saw the small friar in the brown robe, he dropped to his knees, weeping. It was him. Padre Pio had not left the convent. This phenomenon, being in two places at the same time, was reported on multiple occasions throughout his life. During a ceremony in Rome, several cardinals stated they had seen Padre Pio clearly in St. Peter's Square. Investigation confirmed he had been in San Giovanni Rotondo the entire time. There is no scientific framework for this. Not every chapter of his life was marked by wonder. For 20 years, from the late pontificate of Pius XI through the early years of John XXIII, Padre Pio was placed under a formal church investigation. His public appearances were restricted. His communication with the outside world was severely limited. People inside and outside the church accused him of fraud, of deception, of fabricating everything. 20 years. He did not protest publicly. He did not seek allies or make statements in his defense. He continued his reduced routine of prayer with a quietness that those around him found more unsettling than anger would have been. The investigation concluded not only that he was innocent, but that the phenomena surrounding his life defied rational explanation. John Paul II later described those 20 years as decades of fire. A purification, he said, that did not diminish Padre Pio's holiness, but refined it in ways that only suffering can. The connection between Padre Pio and John Paul II is one of the great untold stories of 20th century Catholicism. When Karol Wojtyla was still a young priest in Rome, he made the journey south to San Giovanni Rotondo to meet Padre Pio. He arrived late. The friar had already seen everyone he could see that day. When word reached Padre Pio that a young Polish priest was asking to speak with him, he paused. Then he said, "To this one, I cannot say no."
Many who were present believe that in that moment, Padre Pio already knew who Karol Wojtyla would one day become. The second chapter came in 1962. Wojtyla, now a bishop attending the Second Vatican Council in Rome, received word that a close friend from his youth, a woman named Wanda Poltawska, had been diagnosed with advanced cancer. The prognosis was hopeless. Surgery was scheduled, but no one expected it to help. Wojtyla wrote immediately to Padre Pio, asking for his prayers. The letter had to reach him through intermediaries because of the ongoing restrictions. When it was delivered, Padre Pio read it and said quietly, "To this one cannot say no." 11 days later, Wojtyla sent a second letter to give thanks. Moments before her scheduled surgery, the doctors had examined Wanda one final time. The tumor was gone. She lived for decades more. Father Gabriele Amorth served as the Vatican's chief exorcist for nearly 30 years. Before his death in 2016, he was considered the foremost authority on exorcism in the Catholic world. Near the end of his life, he said this about Padre Pio: "Since I became an exorcist, I have always called upon the help of Padre Pio. He fought against the devil throughout his entire life and always won. And I must tell you, he helps me greatly during the battles." On the morning of September 23, 1968, Padre Pio celebrated his final Mass. Those present described him as paler than usual, frailer. There was a peace on his face that those who had known him for years said they had never quite seen before. And there was something else. The stigmata were gone. The wounds that had been open and bleeding for 50 years were simply no longer there. The skin was clean, no scars, no marks, as though they had never existed. as though the sacrifice had been returned. He died later that same day, peacefully, after receiving the last sacraments. He was 81 years old. The clock on the wall of his room stopped at 2:30 in the morning, the exact moment of his death. It has not moved since.
The grief that followed swept across Italy and far beyond. An enormous crowd made its way to San Giovanni Rotondo for the funeral. In 2002, Pope John Paul II, the young priest who had once heard, "To this one I cannot say no," the bishop whose friend had been healed 11 days after Padre Pio read his letter, declared him a saint before 500,000 people in St. Peter's Square. In March of 2008, 40 years after his death, Padre Pio's body was exhumed. The body was in a remarkable state of preservation, but some features, the eyes, the nose, had not survived intact. The church decided to reconstruct the face using a silicone mask, leaving the rest of the body as found. The beard is real. The hands, deteriorated, were left exposed without reconstruction by deliberate choice. Today, anyone who visits the sanctuary of San Giovanni Rotondo can see those hands through the glass, the hands that bled every week for 50 years, the hands placed over a blind girl's eyes in 1947, the hands that raised the chalice at thousands of masses that people described as unlike anything they had ever witnessed. Pilgrims from every country press their palms against the glass and make their requests every single day. And perhaps that is the most quietly extraordinary thing about Padre Pio. Not the stigmata, not the bilocation, not the demons that reportedly fled at his name during exorcisms decades after his death, but the fact that a man who wanted nothing more than to be a poor friar who prays became one of the most visited figures in the modern Catholic world. He left behind one sentence that has stayed with everyone who knew him. Love is the queen of all virtues. As pearls are strung on a thread, so the virtues are held together by love, and when the thread breaks, they scatter. The thread of Padre Pio's life never broke. This has been another episode of Sacred Routes. If this story moved you, share it with someone searching for the places where history and faith meet in ways that reason alone cannot explain. Subscribe to the channel. In our next episode, we continue this journey through the most extraordinary mysteries of the sacred world. See you then.